And I'd like now to call Duncan to come and give his intervention.
Great, thank you very much. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over the humorous anecdote that would have been the highlight of SSP 2018. Okay, so my name is Duncan McRae. I work for Wolters Kluwer. I wear a few hats there, but one of the hats that I wear is that I work with a publishing company that Wolters Kluwer owns based out of Mumbai called Medno Publications. And I just want to share sort of our experiences. Most of the speakers here have dealt with content in terms of individual content and authors, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the journals themselves that we manage that are based in developing markets. So Medno has about 450 titles across 25 countries. A lot of those are newly launched journals that have launched since we have launched with us. In other words, we didn't acquire a mature title. They're generally not included in major indexes as a result of that. What we see is a lot of them have no staff, so it'll be an editor-in-chief. Maybe they've managed to wrangle in some help from one of their departments in the institution, but there's not a managing editor, there's often not editorial assistants. And a large part of the issue that we deal with is the perception of those journals as being from developing markets and sort of the inherent disadvantages. Part of that is bias, and a lot of that, what I'm going to mention on the next slide, is sort of their own doing. Those journals all aspire to be something. They aspire to be internationally recognized, i.e. get indexed. And I think probably as a publisher, our biggest challenge is managing those expectations. There's an awful lot of discussion that I have with individual editors, and I say, well, what's your 5-year plan? You've just launched. And they say, well, in year 2, we're going to be in Medline. And I sort of say, well, that might not actually happen, so we need to talk about that. So when I say things that they do of their own accord that might hurt their perception, mentioned earlier, there's a lot of international journal of and world journal of that occurs. And these are usually attempts to increase submissions. They think that if they say international, that means that international authors will be attracted to them. There's obviously some cultural quirks that go on. One of them is, and most of the Medno journals are based in India, and they love icons and badges. So when you go to the websites, and we've dealt with this, but when I first started working there, every single available banner, logo, badge existed on the homepage. Those things you used to see sort of like www 3.0 compliant, and nobody knows what that means or cares, but that would be on there. They are particularly susceptible to things like unofficial impact factors, questionable indexes. I've had an editor email me and say, I need all the PDFs of every article we've published plus the cover of the journal because I've been asked to submit it to be part of this new index. And I had to explain to them that most indexes don't require your entire issues in PDF form. That was clearly going to get resold in some way. And then the other one is sort of hiding their affiliations. We've run into this quite a bit. You know, if it's a small institution, and it's a regional journal, they sort of don't want people to know that. Because they think it sort of will lead to a negative perception, but at the same time, the worst sin is to not be transparent about who owns your journal. So we run into that quite a bit. So these are a lot of issues that we see typically and have been dealing with in the last 3 or 4 years that Wolters Kluwer has been very actively involved in Medno. So what do we do then to break the cycle of why these strategies fail? As I said, you know, most of these are shortcuts in order to try and get past these perceptions. So we have to get rid of those shortcuts. The problem is that all these things that they've been doing further drive away the U.S. and European authors that they aspire to get, and then that in turn makes it harder to gain reputable indexing. So all of these things are sort of self-perpetuating, and so we as a publisher have to develop a strategy that we can help these journals with to try and break that cycle. So what we did at Medno in particular is recognizing the lack of staff and also recognizing the sort of lack of guidance that these journals were receiving. We created our own sort of management team to provide editorial strategy. It was not only to provide strategy, but also one of the issues was not necessarily a malicious attempt to act unethically, but more just general lack of knowledge about what standard practices were. And so we have a team of people in Mumbai who basically act as managing editors for the entire portfolio. So if there's a circumstance of academic misconduct, it gets routed through this team to ensure that the journal handles that instance perfectly well and doesn't try and skirt the system. It used to be, and maybe still the case, but these journals, especially new journals, were so afraid of retracting an article because they thought that it would look so poor, it would reflect so poorly on them, that they would go to any length to not retract an article, which of course led to some behaviors which we would not encourage, and we have done away with that kind of thing. We really emphasize the importance of standard practices. We try and follow all the COPE and WAMI and ICMJE and all these things, and we try to instill in them the idea that just because things may have been done a certain way with Indian journals for the last 30 years, if you want to be an internationally recognized journal, you have to behave in a way that's consistent with what we consider the way a journal should act. And the one thing that we did as well was sort of developed an indexing strategy that is across the portfolio. And so instead of just sort of the squeaky wheel getting the grease and filing applications for any editor who just happens to be able to get my home number somehow, we actually have sort of a strategy for the entire portfolio. So journals have to, for us, prove to us that they are following the guidelines and following standard practices before we will file an application on their behalf. So we've been doing this for about the last 3 years at Medno. I got involved in 2014. So we have this editorial team that works collaboratively. Those incidents of academic misconduct are handled properly, so we no longer are constantly answering questions. I don't get as many emails from Retraction Watch anymore, which is pleasant. Those editorial strategies, as I say, they're based on these sort of editorial fundamentals that we preach to them. As a result, we have sort of seen the indexing acceptance rates move above what we would consider the norms. But more importantly, what we're seeing is journals actually listen to us now and not just suggest that we bribe somebody at the indexing agencies. I'm sorry about that, by the way. Probably removed a steady stream of revenue. The future concerns, this is something that we've seen recently, which are indexes, and I think you sort of mentioned it, Marion, this idea that journals get reevaluated, that even though they may be in the index, they might actually be removed at a future time. We've seen this happen with PubMed Central to a couple. That's a specific situation where PubMed Central has changed the way they do the application process, and now they are going back to journals that were accepted under the old application process and sort of looking at them now under the new way and evaluating those. I'm not going to editorialize about that because there is a very slim chance that somebody from NLM and PubMed Central could be in this room named Chris Kelly. And Scopus also does this where they reevaluate who copy edited this slide. There are at least 3 spelling errors in this slide. Deeply ashamed. Phil, I thought you were going to review this when I sent it to you. I've passed the buck. Yeah, sorry about that. And Scopus reevaluate based on metrics, or at least that's what they tell me. So if a journal is not living up to its performance comparatively to other journals in its therapeutic area, they might drop it from Scopus as well. So the old days of sort of getting into an index and sort of saying, okay, I'm in now, I can start worrying about things is no longer the case. Journals really have to maintain their performance and in some cases maybe even improve on their performance in order to maintain their indexing. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Duncan. And I think we just have time for one or two questions. Also, this session is going out live all around the world. It's being beamed to people watching virtually. So if there are any questions from the virtual people, also please let me know. Anyone with any questions? Sir.
Anthony Watkins, cyber research. There's been a lot of debate. Yeah? Is there a mic?
Yeah, there is.
Sorry, I was doing my best. Okay. There's been a... Okay? Yeah. There's been a lot of debate on a number of blogs and lists about the distinction between obviously predatory, we don't use the word predatory anymore, but predatory journals and good journals making a real effort locally, and the sort of things that INASP and AJOL run. Now, the difficulty seems to me to find the division. How do you tell for sure that this journal is not predatory, it's a worthy journal working hard? Okay? Can anybody answer?
I think that one is for Pippa.
Thank you for the question, Anthony, and the answer is no. Next question. No, I mean, it is a huge problem. There are obviously fraudulent journals, but then there's a huge grey area of journals that are, doing things that are either foolish or simply because they're under-resourced. And, it's a massive problem, and I don't think there is an easy way.
We've had instances of journals actually being hijacked. Journals, particularly the small, often in humanities where they're a print product, usually from museums, as a for instance, and someone comes along, they see that it's in Web of Science, and all of a sudden there's an online version, and it really isn't the real journal, unfortunately.
Madam at the back there.
I'll bring you this.
I have a question for Marion, specifically around the rationale of creating the emerging sources database. And it seems like it's now a two-tier system in order to get an impact factor. Some journals go automatically into the core collection. There are some publishers who maybe have, this high impact reputation that you talk about. And then the rest of the journals, if you didn't get in your new launch before 2015, now you're waiting an extended period of time, an unknown period of time for that new impact factor, which is then really important to drive those submissions and get that publication frequency because it's such an important number. And so I just want to understand, couldn't these, inclusion of these journals have been done without a new index, without another barrier, which is how I'm viewing it currently, and maybe just, prolong the evaluation before these, emerging sources can then get an impact factor?
I think that's an excellent question. And I would say that, for Web of Science, we are looked to and our users expect that we are going to have the highest quality, most impactful journals that appear in the journal citation reports. And we wanted to make that distinction. And we have a close to a 90% rejection rate for those databases, which is huge. But, are the journals that have been rejected bad journals? No, they're really good journals, and I think Emerging Sources Citation Index gives those publications an opportunity to be discoverable on the platform, so it makes sense for us. And also, I think there was and has been some misconception that Emerging Sources Citation Index is I've heard it be described as purgatory. It isn't. And that some journals will benefit from that exposure and be evaluated at a future date and find themselves in either the Science or Social Sciences Citation Index. However, we also expect, though this hasn't happened yet, that there will be some journals in the big three flagship databases that maybe have lost their range, their influence, their impact. They're at the very bottom of the category in the fourth quartile. They may find themselves being reevaluated and moved, either deselected completely for whatever reason or moved into ESCI. So I think, there have been any number of journals that have been waiting, have applied over and over again for decades and have never made it in to Web of Science. So I think ESCI is an opportunity, particularly for those journals coming from emerging regions, to be fully discoverable. And some publishers are absolutely delighted that they have that opportunity. Their authors are thrilled to be able to say that their papers are in Web of Science. Do you have a journal in ESCI?
Yes. And we have journals in the core collection. If we would have just launched it 1 year earlier, it probably would get an impact factor. And so that's...
Maybe not. Most likely not. And we should talk.
Yes. I'd be happy to.
Other questions? Anything from the virtual? No?
Nothing.
Okay. In that case, I think that I should just thank the panel, and look forward to any further questions in the aisles. Bye-bye. Thank you.